Hello and welcome to this Basics of the Bible video series that I've been doing. My name is Christopher Scott. It's great to have you watching these videos. Down there in the description, I have a link to this playlist. There's going to be 75 different videos in there, starting with Genesis, ending with Revelation, going book by book through the Bible to help you learn and understand more. So they're all there in that playlist for you to watch for free here on YouTube. So thanks for joining me today. I'm giving you a brief introduction to the historical books. A brief introduction to the historical books. So in this video, I just want to review the 12 books from Joshua to Esther. Joshua to Esther. So let's review of what we've talked about in the past few videos that you may have watched or might not, but I'm going to review some of the material that I've covered thus far in this video series. The first week of this video series, I gave you a story of the Bible. 40 minutes, I covered the entire story of the Bible from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22 and what happens in between there. Basically, God created the world. He placed Adam and Eve in the garden. Then in Genesis chapter 3, Satan enters into the picture, tempts Eve with the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. Then she eats the fruit. It's not an apple like we think from Snow White or whatever it was. It says fruit if you actually read the Bible. Adam and Eve both eat the fruit, and this conflict begins. When Satan enters the garden and Adam and Eve eat that fruit, conflict begins in the Bible. And the rest of the Bible, all the way to chapter 22 of Revelation, there's a video there of that story of the Bible that I told you about. Chapter 3 of Genesis to chapter 22 of Revelation discusses that conflict and the resolution of that conflict. And God provides curses to both the serpent, Satan, and to man and woman there in chapter 3. God says to the serpent, he says, I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. That's the New Living Translation that I'm using there. This is the conflict that the entire Bible deals with and describes and revolves around. And from here, starting in Genesis 3:15, we see that conflict start with Cain killing Abel in Genesis chapter 4. The entire world has gone astray and is evil and lost and fallen from God. Genesis chapter 6 through 9 with the flood and Noah. Genesis chapter 11, we see the Tower of Babel, where people try to build this amazing tower to God, but God separates everybody and spreads them around the world and speaks. They speak in different languages. Then at the end of chapter 11, the beginning of chapter 12, God makes this promise to Abraham. He makes an unconditional covenant with Abraham, saying, I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families of the earth will be blessed through you. That's the New Living Translation again. I normally use the NASB, but for these I use the New Living Translation. That's that unconditional promise that God gives to Abraham in chapter 12 of Genesis. Then he gives it again in chapter 13, then again in chapter 15, then again in chapter 17, then again in chapter 22. God gives this unconditional promise, covenant that he makes with Abraham, that he will bless Abraham with many descendants, and through those descendants, through Abraham's seed, through his sperm, the Hebrew word for sperm, sperma, through Abraham's seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed through Abraham. So God basically says, I will bless you, and you will bless others. This covenant is focused on providing a land for Abraham and a descendant family for Abraham. However, as you read the Bible, Abraham doesn't really take the entire land that was promised to him. As it happened, Abraham's descendants end up living in Egypt and are worked as slaves there for over 400 years in Egypt. So they end up leaving the land to go to Egypt. They never take the land that was promised to Abraham until this leader shows up on the scene named Moses, and he takes the nation of Israel out from Egypt. They've been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. Moses shows up, says, I'm going to take these Israelites out based on God's word to him and his promises to Moses and Aaron, and they lead them out of Egypt toward the promised land. But on that journey, God gives this thing we call the law. In Exodus chapter 19, verses 3 through 6, God tells Moses, this is going to be the nation of Israel. They're going to be my kingdom of priests. You can learn about this in the video on Exodus up there in the ID cards. This nation of Israel, I want them to be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. They're supposed to be unique and distinct and separate than all the other nations of the earth. And that's why God gives them the law, not because he wants to be mean or restrictive. He wants them to look differently than everybody else, and the law was how he got them to look differently. And the law pointed out that they could never obey it fully on their own, therefore they needed a Savior to come to die and make them righteous. So Moses leads the nation of Israel out of Egypt towards the promised land. He gives them the law, and the law was designed to protect the nation of Israel and ensure that they remain distinct and separate, like I shared. And the administration of that law was done by 4 groups of people that we started with in the Pentateuch that we've looked at, in introduction to the Pentateuch video there. And it is going to continue in the historical book. And there are 4 different groups of people that help Israel follow the law. But all of them failed to help them follow the law, right? This is taught to me from Dr. Elliot Johnson in his book, A Dispensational Biblical Theology. There's 4 groups of people that help Israel follow the law. There are priests that we read about in the Pentateuch. There are judges, kings, and their prophets. And I have notes down there in the description of what I'm going through in case you wanted to print those out or use those for your own study. So God gives the law through Moses to the nation of Israel, and then institutes 4 groups of people that you read about in the Old Testament that all try to get Israel to follow the law. But all of them are unsuccessful. After receiving the law, the people do not obey God's command to take the promised land like he has told them. That's in the book of Numbers. And that's where we ended in my last video, this last week. I've been doing about 1 video a week here on YouTube. And that's where we ended at the end of Deuteronomy. Moses has taken the nation of Israel right to the edge of the promised land. They can see it. He gives them the law 1 more time. He gives them the law a 2nd time. He reminds them of certain things. He tells them of curses that God will put on them if they don't obey. He tells them of blessings that God will give them if they do obey. And then Moses dies. Okay? So in essence, we can summarize the Bible up until these historical books according to 3 things. There's a conflict between Satan and man. That's based on Genesis 3:15. There's a land promised to the nation of Israel. That's the promise to Abraham that is in Genesis chapter 12 through 24, pretty much. And then there is a law that's supposed to keep them unique and distinct and separate and holy. That's the book of Exodus as well as Leviticus. Okay? And then under that law, there's 4 groups of people that try to get them to follow it. There are priests, judges, kings, and prophets. Okay, and I'm going to talk about those in these historical books as we go along. Okay, and so that's a brief review of the Pentateuch up until the historical books, setting you up for the historical books. The historical books, like I mentioned, covers the book of Joshua through the book of Esther. Joshua through Esther. There are 12 books that are usually called the historical books. And my best estimation is that these 12 books were written about by 4 different authors, maybe 5, and probably a few others. So we kind of know 4, possibly know 5, but there were some others that helped compile them as well. So the book of Joshua possibly was written by Joshua. Okay, possibly written by Joshua. Samuel possibly wrote Judges, Ruth, and 1 Samuel. That's what Jewish tradition usually tells us. And in each of these videos, I'll explain more why I believe those things. But Samuel possibly wrote Judges, Ruth, and 1 Samuel. But Samuel dies in 1 Samuel 25, so someone must have written the chapters after that. Ezra The man Ezra, man, wasn't a woman, man Ezra wrote, possibly wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, and maybe Esther. And then Mordecai possibly wrote the book of Esther, if that makes sense. So that's who wrote these 12 books that we never really know specifically. None of the books say directly, but we know from history and tradition what we think. The time that's covered in these 12 historical books is 1406 BC. That's when Joshua takes the nation of Israel into the Promised Land. 1406 BC, all the way until 430 BC. That's chapter 13 of the book of Nehemiah. So 1406 BC to 430 BC. That's chapter 13 of Nehemiah, where Nehemiah has left. He comes back and does some more reforms in the city. So they're roughly chronological. Esther comes after Nehemiah, but Esther actually, the timeline of that book takes place between chapters 6 and chapters 7 of the book of Ezra. And I'll cover all that in those videos on those books, okay? The themes of these historical books. These 12 books show a large amount of sinfulness of man and how they could never follow the law on their own, and how they lived unrighteously under the law is really the big theme of these historical books. So, like I like to tell people, the historical books are his story, capital S-T-O-R-Y. They are a story, and that story is about the sinfulness of man and how we cannot follow God on our own, and how God continues his promises through the line of Abraham, through the law, eventually to Jesus. Okay? And the names of all these books usually describe either the people in them or the things going on in them. So Kings, the 2 books of Kings, are about a bunch of kings in the north and south. Chronicles is a chronicalization. It provides chronicles of their history. Ezra is mostly about the man Ezra, half of the book. Nehemiah is probably based on Nehemiah's own personal memoirs and writings. Esther is about a woman named Esther. 1 Samuel is about the judge Samuel. Judges is about the judges. And then Joshua is about the man Joshua taking the promised land. So each book has a specific thing it's talking about, and usually that's connected to the title, which helps us memorize that. And so if you've been watching these videos, I really encourage you to memorize the order of the books of the Bible. Memorize Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Memorize those so that you know the story of the Bible. If you memorize those books, you know a little bit about what you've seen book, you're going to get to know the Bible better. So thanks for watching me and on this video. I hope it's helpful for you to get you up to speed with where we've been in the Bible thus far and what we're going to talk about in the historical books. Again, I'm posting about 1 video a week, so I hope to continue to watch these videos get put out, and hope to see how you enjoy them and are learning from them. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop a question in the comments there. Old Testament history can be difficult and complex, especially with all the dates, so you're welcome to leave a comment. I'd love to interact with you. And I also have listed the big events of the Bible with their dates in the description there. So lots of good free resources and information there for you to help you as you try to study and understand the Bible. One last thing before we go. If you found these videos helpful, I provide a monthly email update with my published articles from the previous month, as well as my newest YouTube videos. So there's a link there. The first comment on this video tells you how you can subscribe to my monthly email newsletter, and I will let you know about these new videos as they come out. Thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you again soon on another video as we start the historical books. Thanks, and God bless.